So hi everyone. I'm sure you guys might know me. My name's Phil, and today I'm going to be talking to you about this notion of growth hacking and how it kind of relates to what we do every single day in software. Now, before I start, I think the obvious question to ask is, what exactly is this buzzword growth hacking? Now, let me introduce to you a man by the name of Sean Ellis. You might have heard of him. If not, he was dubbed the founder of growth hacking after he wrote a blog in 2010 called Find a Growth Hacker for Your Startup. He argued there had to be a better way for a company to boost their online presence rather than the traditional means, the usual billboards, newspaper advertising, guys in chicken suits holding signs, But at the time he was conceptualizing all this when he first entered the industry, no real concept of how to implement this actually existed. So he improvised. He built what he called his first growth model. He had a development background by his nature, and he mapped out how user modeling and customer models could be related to actually implement users' data, so you can encourage people to come back, visit the site, and encourage their friends as well. He wanted to map out how customers would actually flow through the site, because his understanding was that this flow would lead to the eventual aha moment when someone realized, okay, I've actually encountered what I want, and I want to purchase it. By now you're probably thinking this is all a bit vague and I have no idea what you're talking about, but that's okay. Now let's talk about this actual definition of growth hacking. Now, growth hacking is defined as the process of rapid experimentation across marketing channels and product development to identify the most effective, efficient ways to grow a business. So if you're wondering, is this a little bit like a marriage between coding and marketing? You'd kind of be around the mark. Because whereas conventional, traditional marketers are skilled at understanding the usual products as we all know it, the internet, as we know, has created this radical redefinition of the concept product. Once a product might have been a physical good, a car, shampoo, toothpaste, guns, whatever. Now, they're the invisible bits and bytes that form software products. Twitter's a product, Facebook's a product, Tinder's a product, your online accounting software is a product. Things you can't hold necessarily per se now are products. And this is the transition most responsible for the new age of growth hackers that we've all heard about now. These tech-savvy coders and similar types who know only one true north for their product, that being growth. And yes, you're right, it's kind of like being a digital version of Don Draper. So let's talk about some actual real-world examples. Take this image for example. It's a simple referral program, one that we might today know so well. But back when it was first implemented by Sean Ellis, who we met earlier, it was revolutionary. This concept of this give-take model, where you gave a customer something in return for something. This was the brainchild of Sean, and actually at the time it led to a massive 60% increase month on month of their user base, and was quite revolutionary at the time. Another good example is Airbnb. Now, some of you might remember when Airbnb used to look like this and when it had that logo, but they're also similarly considered to be masters in their early endeavors in the growth hacking field. See that green button over there, the repost to Craigslist? It's actually a bit of a technical masterstroke, because I think we can all relate to the occasional agony of a misfunctioning on-click button. But imagine one that had the functionality of grabbing a user's data, visiting Craigslist behind the scenes, logging into Craigslist with that user's data, posting a listing for you, and sending you an email back in response. That was the beauty of what Airbnb did at the time and actually made them quite well known, because they weren't spending the kind of money that we'd be talking about on traditional marketing, Google AdWords, etc. They were making their customers' life better and exposing their customers' information to a wider user base because of these technical marvels. So if you're wondering, growth hacking can be in the form of data modeling, as we've just seen. I mean, take a simple user model. It's not just a name, an email, a postcode, an address, for example. You can also start incorporating these things like, for example, a Craigslist reporting link, or, for example, if we're using Dropbox, as we saw before, the idea that if you get bonus data if you refer a friend. These are the kind of things that we can start thinking about when we do modeling that influences the notion of growth. Now, in my previous life before full stack, I actually worked a little bit in this field for a startup in Sydney. Now, as you can see on the board, there's a few examples of some very useful tools that you can really use to give you the specific information that you want about your user base and the people who visit your site. And I'd like to talk a little bit about these growth aha moments, when you've got an assumption about users, but you realize that they're actually sometimes incorrect or correct. Now, let's take a look at this image. This is a case study of the company I used to work for. We have clearly defined above the fold and below the fold elements, and quite pronounced call to actions. Now, as a development team, we'd installed certain tools to help us assist to view how users had gone through our site. There was one called DoubleClick, which allowed you to visually view where users are clicking, Google AdWords, as I'm sure we all know about, and this concept called Mixpanel, which I found quite interesting and I'll expand upon. Now, Mixpanel is an excellent tool in the way it allows you to create user journeys through your site. And the technology behind it is quite simple. A user visits a site, a particular token is inserted on that page which they visit, it attaches itself individually to each user's cookie and follows them through the site until they eventually click away. Now, here's an example of a classic Mixpanel funnel, and I should clarify, it's just an example and there's no business-sensitive data there. It goes from a home page to an individual results page, to a details page, and finally a checkout page. A flow that I know we all can easily relate to as we build our Stack store. And I often hear this expression when talking about sites. If it's functional, you don't need to worry about the rest. And this is why I find the concept of growth hacking so interesting, because it is that marriage between the functionality, the experience, and the design, as someone spoke about before. I mean, in an ideal world, we'd have 1.6 million people entering our site, as we see here, and 1.6 million people going to the checkout and exiting the site. And that's a beautiful world. We get lots of customers and we make plenty of money. Instead, when we look at this data, we say, hey, we've got 1.6 million people visiting our home page, and only 19% of them are going through and converting to the second page. Now, what are the things that we as developers can do to maximize that conversion rate? Now, I'd actually like to use another case study when referring to growth hacking, and hopefully this example can talk to us about how growth-driven development isn't purely a facet of the back-end domain, but also the front-end domain. Now, this site might be familiar to some, but it's actually a project that my friends Anthony, Jihei, Emily, and myself and I are in the process of building. Now, like all product teams, there's always a quite spirited debate about design decisions. You know, I think this color looks better, I think this button's too big, whatever. And here's one example of a color palette that we thought we liked the look of. Now, of course, we have a different example there of a different color scheme. Now, these two are just simple examples of cosmetic changes with no actual functional difference. You know, one of them could have one button and one of them could have two, but it made me think about another important element of growth hacking. A/B testing. Now, Google Analytics provides a fantastic ability to display two different versions of your site to two different people when you visit. Now, I, for example, could search for entrepreneur on Google and be presented with the cyan background theme that you guys saw. Accordingly, and similarly, one of you, for example, could also do the exact same process, go to Google, search for it, and you'd be presented with a completely different page with perhaps different functionality. Now, when you set up your test originally, you can set up different success metrics. So, for example, if I say someone has to buy a product, that's deemed as successful. And then over the period of a pre-designed 2 to 4 weeks, perhaps, you'll get some data back about what's more effective. So now, using the example, I doubt that using this example, which is just purely a cosmetic change, there'd actually be a notable spike one way or the other, purely based on colors. But the lesson here is that this tool in A/B testing is so easily available to us, and it can often act as the impartial arbitrator when making important design and product decisions. And more importantly, you can often back up your assumptions with empirical data. Now, a good model that a wise man once told me was when you're trying to grow your product, obviously implement it in the first place, test the assumptions you may have, remembering they're exactly that, they're just assumptions. And finally, iterate over the results of your testing. I mean, that's why when you look at Airbnb, for example, they're constantly changing their homepage. It's not a page that you see and you forget about and you come back to it and you're like, oh, it's been changed. That's not usually at the whim of a designer who's just like, I hate this page, I'm going to change it, whatever, you know? It's usually data influence, and it says that, you know, people are flowing through the site in a particular way, and you know what? We want to change that. So, for example, if we all visited the site right now, there's a fair chance that we'll all see different pages because they might have implemented A/B testing, and you'd see 4 different pages, and they'd be getting data back about that in 4 to 5 weeks' time. Now, these are just a few examples of the recommended readings I've found in this field. In particular, Learn Startup Marketing is one that I've found to be really quite fascinating. And some other ones that I've been heard about that are quite recommended are Viral Loop by the journalist Adam Punenberg and Jonah Berger's Contagious. Let me leave you with a final thought before I leave though. Now, as developers, whenever we sit down in code, our minds are often directly influenced by things like clean code, test-driven development, avoiding repetition, and visual and material design principles. It's often easy to forget that at the end of the day, just like we often talk about readable code, humans are the ones that consume our products and not machines. If we take a moment to imagine how users will visit our site, the kind of things that they're looking for that'll make the experience fantastic, and then when we eventually make assumptions that we don't know to be unequivocal, we can slowly start to develop our growth-driven mindset. Thanks very much for your time.